The legal battle surrounding Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia University student of Palestinian descent, has ignited both national and international debate. Detained in Louisiana after his arrest a week ago, Khalil's case has become a focal point for discussions about the intersection of activism, immigration law, and foreign policy. His lawyers argue that Khalil, a 30-year-old permanent U.S. resident, should be released on bail, emphasizing his lack of criminal charges, the support he has from family and friends, and the pressing need for him to be present for the birth of his first child. With these legal arguments, his team seeks to not only address the immediate issue of his detention, but also the broader questions of dissent and state power in the United States. Background of the case: Khalil, a committed advocate for Palestinian rights, was involved in a prominent movement at Columbia University that voiced strong opposition to Israel's military actions in Gaza. Following the October 2023 attack by Hamas, these protests, part of a larger wave of activism across U.S. college campuses, have sparked a polarizing response from the government. President Donald Trump's administration has promised to crack down on activists linked to such protests, with threats of deportation hanging over the heads of many students who participated. Khalil, who was born and raised in the United States to Palestinian parents, is deeply rooted in his community. He holds a permanent U.S. residency status and is married to an American citizen. His wife is due to give birth next month, and his lawyers have underscored this personal milestone as a critical reason for his immediate release on bail. Since his arrest, Khalil's case has caught the attention of a wide range of political figures, human rights organizations, and academic institutions, many of whom are now calling for his release. The growing chorus of support is based not only on the personal nature of his situation, but also on concerns about the broader implications for free speech and the right to protest in the United States. The legal framework, deportation and foreign policy concerns. The U.S. government's rationale for Khalil's detention rests on national security and foreign policy concerns. Justice Department lawyers have cited provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act, INA, which grants the Secretary of State the power to recommend the deportation of foreign nationals whose presence is deemed potentially harmful to U.S. foreign policy. This law, passed in 1952, was initially designed during the Cold War to restrict the entry of individuals whose political beliefs were considered incompatible with U.S. interests. Under this law, the Secretary of State may request the deportation of an immigrant if their actions or affiliations are seen as a threat to American diplomatic or security interests. In this case, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has publicly stated that Khalil's activities, particularly his participation in the protests against Israeli policies, could have serious adverse foreign policy consequences. Legal experts, however, have pointed out that this provision of the INA is rarely invoked. Critics of Khalil's detention argue that this move represents an overreach of government power, particularly in its potential to silence dissent and curb freedom of expression. Khalil's lawyers have framed his arrest and detention as an infringement upon his First Amendment rights, noting that the charges against him are vague and unfounded. The absence of any criminal charge against Khalil makes his detention even more contentious, according to his legal team. Activism and government crackdown on free speech. Khalil's activism has positioned him at the center of a growing conflict between political dissent and state power. The ongoing protests against Israeli actions in Gaza, particularly those on college campuses, have been a flashpoint for this conflict. Many students and activists argue that their right to protest is an essential part of their democratic freedoms, and that the US government should not have the authority to criminalize dissent or use deportation as a tool to suppress political activism. The Trump administration's vow to deport activists who have participated in such protests is widely viewed as a significant escalation in the politicization of immigration enforcement. Legal scholars have warned that this could set a dangerous precedent for future cases in which individuals could be targeted for their political beliefs or actions, leading to a chilling effect on free speech. Has become emblematic of these concerns, with critics arguing that his detention is not just about his personal activities, but about sending a broader message to those who challenge US foreign policy. The government's actions, they say, could deter future generations of activists from speaking out, knowing that their participation in protests could have serious, long-term consequences for their ability to remain in the country. The impact on Khalil's family and support network. One of the most compelling arguments made by Khalil's lawyers is the impact of his detention on his family. Khalil's wife, an American citizen, is due to give birth next month. His lawyers have emphasized that Khalil's role as a supportive partner and father is essential during this pivotal moment in his family's life. The motion for bail specifically addresses his need to return home to help his wife prepare for the birth of their child, underscoring his ties to the US and his lack of any intention to flee. Khalil has the backing of a wide network of supporters, including current and former classmates, professors, and colleagues at Columbia University. Many of these individuals have publicly called for his release, stating that he has always been a responsible and law-abiding individual. His involvement in protests, they argue, is rooted in his deep commitment to human rights and justice, not any desire to break the law. The emotional toll on Khalil's wife, who is facing the prospect of giving birth without her husband by her side, has further galvanized support for his release. His lawyers have pointed to the numerous letters of support from family, friends, and members of the Columbia University community as evidence of his strong ties to the US and his community. The broader legal and political context. Khalil's case also falls within a larger political context, where debates over immigration, national security, and the rights of activists are increasingly at the forefront of public discourse. The Trump administration has made immigration enforcement a key aspect of its domestic policy, with deportation being used not only as a tool for addressing illegal immigration, but also as a method for controlling political opposition. The actions taken against Khalil are part of a broader pattern of government crackdowns on activists involved in pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel protests. In recent months, federal agents have targeted student groups, conducted raids on university campuses, and investigated what they term possible violations of terrorism laws. These actions have raised alarms about the extent to which the US government is willing to go to suppress political activism, particularly when it involves international issues that challenge US foreign policy. The path forward. What's next for Khalil and other activists? As Khalil's legal team awaits a decision on his bail motion, the case remains a flashpoint for broader debates about the state's role in regulating political speech and activism. If Khalil is granted bail, he would be able to return home to support his wife and prepare for the birth of his child. But the case will likely continue to unfold in the courts, with the potential for significant legal precedents to be set. For Khalil, the immediate concern is the well-being of his family and his ability to return to a normal life. However, His case is also part of a larger struggle for the right to protest and express dissent without fear of government retribution. Many activists and legal experts are watching closely to see how the courts will rule, as this case could have far-reaching implications for future cases involving political activists and immigration law in the coming days. As the US government continues its investigation into the protests at Columbia University and other campuses, the fate of Khalil and others like him will likely continue to be a source of controversy and legal challenges. For now, Khalil's supporters remain hopeful that justice will prevail and that his release on bail will allow him to be with his family during this important moment in their lives.